a topic that can be really sensitive. And so what I would like to invite everyone to do, if you're willing, is just to take a moment to move into the awareness, if you would, of that we're going to be talking about um, living with difficulty. So if you could just move into an awareness about that, a softening in your body and heart. Um, you may even take a moment to put your hands over your heart and identify, if you can, for a moment, what difficulty you might be experiencing. Could be something that's happening right now. It could be a pain in your body. It could be some news that you received today that's difficult. But it could also be something in the past that you're struggling with to forgive yourself or others for, or it could be a difficulty of the future and thinking about the worry about the future or what it might hold, what your next steps may be in life, etc. So I'd like you to just take a moment to open your heart and your mind and your body to receive the message of identifying what those difficulties might be and how in the practice we sit and live with those difficulties. Um, I will share with you that I did make notes, and I'm going to try very hard not to just read off of the notes, but one of the reasons why I made so many notes is that this topic has been on my heart for a while, and wanting to give a dharma talk, I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. So forgive me if I'm reading from the notes. But just to kind of start, I wanted to share that many of you know that I've been taking BART into work, out of work, and kind of, doing this new public transportation thing. And one of the things that it's been able to allow me to do is, travel with my headphones and just kind of listen to some inspirational things and music sometimes, but Dharma talks. And one of the people, which I know many of you in the practice know, his name is Philip Moffitt. And I actually listened to a talk by him on this subject. And it really inspired me to share with everyone, um, kind of my own experience with difficulty and how that's had an impact on my journey, but also how being introduced to the practice has helped me to live with those difficulties. Um, so I wanted to just kind of say that I know each of us, right? We all live with difficulty, and if you feel like you don't and you want to go have some ice cream, then I'm happy for you. But I think one of the things that really ties us together as human beings, as a sangha, as a spiritual community, is the difficulties that we face. Um, it could be our own difficulty, our own suffering. It could be the difficulty of someone we love. Maybe it's a relationship difficulty, or maybe it's difficulty to understand, what might be going on with perfect strangers, or difficulty understanding what's happening while our world is warring. So I think, we can all agree that we have this common ground. And this is why, Buddha and the practice really spoke about suffering and how none of us are without it. So I think we can all agree on that. Um, But I think one of the things that I've learned in this practice, and that I think that a part of me is always carried with me, is that we openly embrace it. We openly embrace the difficulty, because the alternative to not embracing the difficulty would be our reaction to it, right? Um, so I think that that is really something that I've learned. Um, I'll share with you a little bit about my own difficulty and my own introduction to the practice, and how it's taught me a lot, especially through my husband Eric. Eric and I met a little over 3 years ago, and I think the thing that I really appreciate about this sangha and the practice is that there was never anything about it that made me feel I had to give up on other parts of my faith, or, I had to not believe in God, or, it was just like this wonderful and beautiful addition to my life, but also in a way that I felt like I've kind of always carried with me. Like I said, mindfulness and meditation, and being present in the moment is something that I've tried to practice and carry with me. I was even, when I was preparing for this, I was even thinking about a time when I was in community college and I was taking a speech class, and I did research and gave this whole speech class on, you know, being in the moment. And I really enjoyed that. So, coming into the practice, I think that many of you that know me, or maybe you don't, know that I think that I was faced with difficulty at a very young age. I grew up in a very loving and wonderful household. But at the age of 6, I became a type 1 diabetic. And so that, I think, being faced with that difficulty from a very young age, I'm not really sure that I remember anything before it. And I think many of us who have had any kind of um, illness or trauma in our childhoods, maybe, and maybe we don't remember anything before that. It was almost like we were born into this difficulty. But at the same time, there's a part of me that has learned along my journey and through the practice also that it's brought me a great amount of joy, because one of the things I've learned, and that I really believe that the practice teaches, is that, you know, suffering often brings joy. And in that, joy allows freedom. So that's really kind of what I want to talk about. So from a very young age, I was molded into, constantly the difficulty of chasing my blood sugar, giving myself injections. And, so for me, the difficulty sometimes can be in the moment. It can be, uh, my blood sugar's high or low, or, chasing it around, and that difficulty is present in the moment. But sometimes it can just be the mental suffering of knowing that there's never a break from it. I never can just say, well, I want to just stop being a diabetic for a day. Or sometimes I'll tease Eric, like, you want to just hold on to my insulin pump for a while. But I can't do that, right? So I think that what I would like to share with you in this talk is how the practice, how um, those things of being present and mindful have molded me. I think from a very young age, even I remember my dad telling the story about me being in the hospital and, being diagnosed, and they had to learn how to give me these injections. And I'm on the bed, like with my sleeve rolled up, like, come on, dad, you can do it. It's okay, and just being amazed by that. And I've always been told by my parents and others that I have this resiliency. But I think that that really came from two places. The first place is the love, the loving kindness that I was always given, which I'm incredibly thankful for as a child. But also, I always had this awareness. I'm not really sure where it came from, but I always had this awareness about, it could always be worse, and sometimes I think that that's my own mindset of being able to accept it daily, is that I'm not dying of cancer and I'm not, you know, suffering every day. Some days are hard, and Eric can attest to that, and it's hard on him and it's hard on my loved ones, but in between the hard days there's a lot of good days, and there's a lot of joy and ease and peacefulness. So I cling on to those things to, I guess, have this feeling like there's always a better time coming. The other thing the difficulty that I think over the course of my life that kind of just has molded me is just the journey of being a single mom. Before I met Eric 3 years ago, I was always, working so hard and taking care of my son and making sure that, he was provided for. And there were a lot of things about that were really difficult. But I think kind of when I think of this like pivotal time in my life when I met Eric, and I was living in Sacramento, and I was working as a store manager in Roseville, and it was great, and I loved the company, and everything was golden, like it was great. And then my boss came and shared the news with me that they were closing the store and I was going to be without a job. And it absolutely devastated me. I mean, Eric can share with you that I called him like someone had died. I was, you know, this is the top of the mountain and the mountain just crumbled. There's nothing left for me. Um, and I think at the time I was really puzzled and a little bit angered by his reaction, which was, okay, so you lost your job. So you'll find another one, go wherever you need to go and we'll go there. And I think what he taught me during that time, and now in reflecting on that time, is that even sometimes in difficulty comes blessings that I never would have anticipated. I never would have imagined that I would move to the Bay Area. And when I originally moved to the Bay Area 2.5 years ago with Eric, I took an opportunity that I thought was great, and it turned out to be very, very just devastatingly impactful negatively on my health, physically, mentally. And I really had to take the time to step back and think about, like, how did I get here? What does all this mean, and how am I gonna, move past it? Um, and so I really took the time, um, thankfully with the support of Eric, and it was a very difficult time for both of us. But I am, as some of you know, I've been extremely blessed to work now in San Francisco for Chanel. And it's just quite amazing to me now that I've kind of arrived here in this place where they take care of their people. And, I actually look forward to going to work. And I've been really learning a lot about Coco Chanel as a woman. And it's been really inspiring to me, and kind of ties into my talk tonight about a lot of people don't know that she was an orphan. You know, people think that she was like born with this silver spoon in her mouth, but she was actually, her mother died when she was very young, and her father took her and her siblings all to an orphanage in France. But one of the things that I found to be really inspiring about her story is that through this time in the orphanage, she decided to use things and experiences there as some of her inspiration for her designs. For example, you'll see the camellia flower on every package that we give with every, we wear one every day as part of our uniform. And that's because in the orphanage, there were all of these camellias. And that was the thing that she kind of looked for to inspire herself, that there was always a better day coming, that the time was going to come where she would be in a better place. And I really found that to be quite inspiring, because while she could have chosen to just bury that past and, you know, not want to think about it, you know, she really chose to embrace that pain and that struggle and make it into beautiful things. And I think what that really has taught me in this practice, and also through my experience, is that there's always the idea of hope. And hope is something that I know I've heard Eric talk a lot about, you know, in being incarcerated, that the very worst thing that you could lose is your hope. So I wanted to share that sometimes in difficulties, you know, sometimes they're small, right? They're small, but maybe they're constant. Maybe it's a chronic pain. Maybe it's something that we are experiencing in our body. Maybe it's something that we're just struggling with, a feeling or an emotion, or something that we're having trouble letting go of from our past. And really, it's tied into every aspect of our lives. Could be, you know, financial difficulties, it could be relationship difficulties, loneliness, health issues, physical limitations. Maybe it's a loss, you know, maybe when you put your hands over your heart, you feel the loss of someone that you missed, or that you miss, or a regret of the past. And the thing with all of these things is they get compounded, right? Like they get compounded into us internally. And what happens is we react. Oftentimes we react with despair or denial, you know, being guilty, self-pity, constant like irritation. And these things can manifest in us, and they can create, you know, mental and physical issues. You know, some of us I know face restlessness and fear. I know for myself, when I was raising my son and I was working, and I would often disguise difficulty with distraction and just keep myself super busy, in order to kind of mask what was really going on. Or, you know, I felt like if I sat still, then I had to give an awareness to that pain, or um, that thing in my mind that was difficult. And one of the things that I think really inspired me from listening to this talk was really realizing that each of these mindsets are okay, that there's no judgment around our reaction and our fear. There's no there's not a judgment about any single one, because these things are naturally arising in us, right? These things are natural emotions, pains, and fears. But within that, I think what can kind of not change the difficulty, some things are fixable, right? If my blood sugar is low, I'm going to drink some juice and then it's fixable. But some difficulties are especially hard because, maybe it's a struggle that we're having about a difficulty of a loved one, and there's nothing we can do to fix it. We can't, it's completely out of our hands, or it's in the past. It's a regret or pain that we can't change. Um, so I think what the practice has really taught me is that we actually, as funny as it might sound, we want to tend to them. We want to identify what they are, and we want to give awareness to what these difficulties are so that we can realize that we aren't inadequate. We're not guilty, or we shouldn't be ashamed of these naturally rising things, but that they're really worthy of our heart's attention, and they're worthy of the recognition so that we can tend to them and allow ourselves, I guess, the self-care that we need, and so that we can identify what things or people, or I know for many of us, nature um, is tending to our difficulties. It might be meditation or alone time or quiet. um, I know for myself it's my animals. And I've when I had this awareness, once I shared with my mom and dad that we always had these cats when I was growing up, and cats would, sadly, they would run out into the busy street and get hit by cars. And you know but that taught me difficulty and suffering, and the being reborn in joy by getting another cat. And I think that I recognized to them and thanked them recently for always allowing me to have these cats around, because they helped me with my difficulty of the diabetes. I would be feeling these difficulties and I would just go bury my face in some cats, feel so much better. So, and I know that Eric can tell you that that's still partly true to this day. Um, so I think that, really what I wanted to talk about is, you know, kind of having that, gentle awareness, the softening of not denying the difficulties. And I know sometimes when we see people or loved ones and it's like, oh, how are you doing? Oh yeah, everything's great, and maybe we don't want to talk about the difficulties, and that's okay too. I just wanted to share that I think that that's one of the things that really brings us together so greatly as a spiritual community because, when I was first introduced to the practice, I was just immediately accepted and loved and embraced, and there's no greater feeling than that. Um, and that has really, in listening to a lot of the talks and hearing more talks, it's really, I guess, been able to nourish me in a way that I've never really experienced before. And that's really why I really wanted to give this talk, because I wanted to hopefully nourish this spiritual community by realizing that, it's okay to give ourselves permission to identify difficulties so that that can become a tool and a resource, um, in order to sit with the difficulty and react in a way that gives ourselves permission to embrace it in the spirit of loving kindness. I think sometimes we're really good at giving each other loving kindness, but do we really sit with that difficulty and give ourselves that loving kindness? Are we able to forgive ourselves for something that maybe we haven't, or forgive someone else? And I know that that's another whole talk, but I feel like, it's inside everyone, it's inside all of you and me. And that really, in this spiritual community of loving kindness, giving loving kindness to each other and to ourselves, it really kind of gives like this great shout of joy, and with doing that, and kind of sitting with it, and maybe it's just sharing with someone a difficulty, like, have you ever had that moment where you're just venting, right? Like, this happened to me on the street and it was scary, or whatever, and identifying with that difficulty. And on the other side of that is like this great shout of joy, like, oh, I feel so much better, thank you for sharing, giving me your energy of loving kindness. um but I encourage us, in the spirit of the practice and loving kindness, to give that to ourselves. Sometimes we're so busy taking care of everyone and everything, and we know the difficulty is there, right? It's like this, maybe a gnawing feeling, or something that we just haven't accepted. But I think knowing what it is and knowing how it's showing up, maybe it is showing up in sleeplessness, or restlessness, or um fear. And I think really what I try, and what the practice has taught me, is to be willing to be with it, um be with it, and knowing how it's showing up, so that I can ease into it instead of pushing it away, so that I can heal from it, or also grow from it, like, maybe what's the lesson I'm supposed to be learning too, just like this example with this job and the place I'm at in my life. you know Another thing I used to struggle with as a difficulty is just the longing of finding true love. And I don't mean in like, I mean like the true love that stays and shows up. Um, that true love I never experienced before, Eric. And I suffered from a lot of guilt from decisions that I made trying to find it or longing for it. But it wasn't really until I was able to sit with myself in that longing and that loneliness and identify it and knowing how it was showing up that I could be ready to receive him. So that was the lesson for me in that experience, was just learning how to ease into it and feel it and give myself permission to, you know that it may never happen. And when I became content with that, that's when, he rode in on his white horse and threw me on the back and said, let's go. um, so, I mean, just those are some of the things that I wanted to um, share with all of you that the practice has taught me. I feel like the dharma is like a skillful way to be with difficulties, but also within that, finding love. Um, love for each other, but love for ourselves. Softening into the moment um, allows you to be whatever you need to be in that moment. You could be tired, you could be energized, you could be sad, you could be angry, but softening into that moment and realizing how it's coming. If we're willing to sit with it and sit with the pain of it, then that's when the letting go and the freedom comes. And I think, realizing that having that insight also creates kind of a maturity, right? Like a growth where maybe I think that that's something that Eric has taught me, is just the growth. And sometimes he'll say to me, like, one thing that practice has taught me, and I'm always, even if I feel resistant or hesitant to it in the moment, I hear that message and it's like, yeah, that makes sense, because those things, those difficulties, they don't define me. They're with me. They're with me right now, or they might be with me, like my diabetes is going to be with me until the day I'm not on this earth. But it doesn't define me. It's just with me. So it gives me like a different perspective to appreciate and hopefully share that with others. Um, just staying in the moment. But again, just being willing to be present in the moment, and being willing to practice loving kindness for others, and having compassion, and just moving in the attitude of loving kindness, but also for ourselves. So when we put up, when we identify what it is, allowing ourselves the loving kindness for ourselves to identify how we can grow, I guess, into a place of like the sacred nowness. Because if I'm giving, one other thing I've learned, and then I'll quit, is that when I'm giving my thoughts and energy to this difficulty, and that difficulty, I'm missing out on the present and all the things that are going on around me that are beautiful and that are joyful. I'm robbing myself of them because I'm not in that moment. So that's kind of the message I wanted to share, is just and thank you all for being our spiritual community. I know because of my work schedule, I can't always join, but you guys are always dear to my heart, and I appreciate you giving me the time and space to share that.